The Philadelphia Eagles brought in some more competition for that wide receiver 3 spot, and compared to the signing last week they made, I like this signing a whole lot more.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans. I'm Louie DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. You can also find my Eagles content over at Bleacher Report on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. The Eagles made a smart move at wide receiver today, bringing in a pretty familiar name. We're also going to discuss what's going on with DeVonta Smith's contract extension and one prospect on both sides of the ball that I'm starting to warm up to for the Eagles on day one of the NFL draft. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet does not win. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So yeah, General Manager Howie Roseman continued to do work on Thursday, signing another receiver on offense. The Eagles agreed to a 1-year contract with former Indianapolis Colt and New York Giant Parris Campbell. You're going to know this name. This is a former second-round pick in 2019, a big name from a big school in Ohio State, ran a 4.31 that year during the 40-yard dash, which was the fastest time for any receiver that year in the draft class. But you're also going to remember Parris Campbell because that year the Eagles also selected a receiver in the second round. It was J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who we now know was one of the worst picks in Eagles history. Just from the start, you knew that kid could not play. We were all saying, see, that's why you take DK Metcalf. That's why you take Terry McLaurin. Hell, that's why you wait and take a Deontay Johnson who was in that class. Well, the Eagles, they weren't debating between J-Jaw and those guys. It was between Arcega-Whiteside and Parris Campbell. Howie Roseman, some scouts wanted Parris Campbell. It sounded like Jeffrey Lurie and Doug Peterson wanted J-Jaw. The owner and the coach got their way. So the Eagles, in a way today, kind of got their guy in Campbell, who Howie Roseman did like during that process. Howie, I think this is a good move compared to if he selected Campbell in the second round. This is a low-risk, high-reward, 1-year signing. I think it's a really good fit. Parris Campbell, as I mentioned, he's that speedster, that 4.31 type of player that I really wanted in the slot. I wanted a field stretcher because, as you guys have heard me for years now say, Quez Watkins was perfect, the perfect style of receiver to complement A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. I feel that same way about Parris Campbell. I want that field stretcher because that kind of guy can make an impact without having, I should say. He doesn't need to have, 5 to 10 targets in a game. He can have 1 to 3, and he can really make an impact with chunk yardage deep down the field. Also run after the catch ability, low average depth of target, predetermined, pre-snap motion, manufactured touches in the screen game, the reverse game, over the middle of the field. I think that's a perfect kind of complement to an offense that has 4 target monsters in DeVonta Smith, in A.J. Brown, in Dallas Goedert, in Saquon Barkley at running back. I like that the Eagles did add the style of player. And last week it was more of the physical boundary receiver in Devontae Parker, who can be your bigger slot, right? Your Julio Jones of last year. But I like this idea more for wide receiver 3. The good thing is neither one has almost any guaranteed money in the contract. You can still take a receiver in the top 3 or 4 rounds if you want to. You're not tied to these two players, but it does give you some optionality, some versatility in the slot. You have a fast guy, you've got a big guy, 2 veterans that were high draft picks that, again, did not really meet the draft value that was placed on them by the Miami Dolphins and the Indianapolis Colts, but they have shown some flashes in their career. With Parris Campbell, again, he's only really had 1 solid year, but that was only 2 years ago. In 2022 with Indianapolis, Campbell did surpass 60 receptions and over 600 yards on the year. So that to me is an upgrade over what Quez Watkins was last year, is an upgrade over, a guy that you could get in the 2nd or 3rd round this year. Probably not. But again, I'll always bet on taking a risk for a 4.3 speed type of receiver. And again, it's not like you really need this guy. It's not like in the 2nd round of the 2019 draft where you were picking him potentially to be your future wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. this is a much different situation. I can't believe it's been 5 years, but 5 years later. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Nick Sirianni loves this guy. He was the offensive coordinator for the Colts when they did draft Campbell in 2019. Sirianni has always talked glowingly of this player. I think it's a really, really solid move. And like I said, this doesn't tie you down. You can still do anything you want in the NFL draft if you want to add a receiver. But I just think Campbell's a really good fit for what Kellen Moore is looking to do with more pre-snap motion, run after the catch, manufactured touches. I think he's definitely going to be an upgrade over Quez Watkins. The one issue with Parris Campbell, he does need to stay healthy. He has missed games every single year, has really not been that durable in Indianapolis. Took a step back last year in New York after a career-high season, just did not make much of an impact. But between Campbell and DeVonta Parker now, again, it was a low bar for sure to pass, but I think that's a better duo than, and Britton Covey potentially developing more as a receiver this year. I think that's a solid trio, an upgrade to what you had last year, in last year's version of Quez, OZ, and just a shell of Julio Jones. Maybe you go out there and, again, you draft a receiver. Maybe you still add a Hunter Renfrow and say, we're going slot by committee. We got the big boy in DeVonta Parker. We've got the fast guy in Campbell. We've got the technician in Renfrow. Maybe that's an idea and you just pay 3 receivers the price of 1 contract. Either way, I think this is a solid move, and it really can't hurt the offense just to add another veteran who's going to compete for a roster spot. That's the thing, is these guys could be wide receiver 3, but maybe neither one is. Maybe both these players are your next Ruben Randall, where you sign a well-known veteran name and he just doesn't even make the roster. That can be the case because, again, the contract, you're not held down to anything. You're not tied down to these players, so it's a low-risk, potentially high-reward move. I'm a big fan of the signing, and this is an exciting player. Again, 4.31. He can also return kicks. Of course, you have one of the best punt returners in the league, and Britton Covey, but if you want a new kick returner, Boston Scott potentially leaving in free agency, this is a pretty good option. We're going to stick with receiver coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. I want to get into DeVonta Smith's potential contract extension. Why is it so quiet on that front over the first 2 weeks of free agency? We will get into that coming up next as we continue this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset, which is going down right now as I'm doing this show potentially, or if you're betting on a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you're going to get $200 back in bonus bets with your first $5 bet when it wins. That's $200 back to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all in March Madness. I don't really have that pick yet. I'm a little nervous with this tournament, but if you feel bold, you can go for it on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. We appreciate FanDuel for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every. All right, let's talk a little DeVonta Smith, the Eagles' wide receiver 1B. I don't want to call him the wide receiver 2 behind A.J. Brown because he's elite in his own right. There's only, a handful of receivers that I would take over DeVonta in the NFL right now to start my franchise. DeVonta Smith, he still has 2 years left on his rookie contract, right? He's heading into year 4. Then you also, because he was a first-round pick, you do have that fifth-year option, which you're going to utilize for sure. You're going to want to at least keep Smith for these next 2 years. But I will say, and we talked about this on the show when we were previewing the offseason, like what are the first big moves that are going to come? We mentioned the Landon Dickerson contract extension. We saw that was the first move of free agency when the tampering window opened on Monday. Howie Roseman did not hesitate. But I said DeVonta Smith, it's him and Dickerson. Like, those are the priorities. Make sure you lock up those 2 core pieces from the 2021 NFL draft. And DeVonta, to me, was priority number 1. They signed Dickerson to the most lucrative contract for a guard in NFL history. But it's been very quiet on the DeVonta front. We heard Howie Roseman comment about it at the Combine, saying you don't want to lose those types of players. You want to keep them around long term. It sounds like an extension is something the Eagles are not just open to do, but very much so. They want to do it. You heard DeVonta Smith talk about it a little bit, but I really do wish he was extended by now. This is a priority. This is a guy that I do not want to lose long term. Heck, I would even prioritize him over A.J. Brown if it came down to that. I don't think it will. To me, you have to keep this big three together of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and DeVonta Smith. But at the same time, he is not extended yet. So I'm hoping that's atop the Eagles' priority list. And I think it is. Why there's not an extension done, I think it's more about DeVonta than it is the Eagles. Like, I think the Eagles, knowing Howie Roseman and his history, he likes to get deals done early, whether it's at quarterback or pretty much any position. He's done this with Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Mailata, Josh Sweat, Avonte Maddox. Now you could say Landon Dickerson. Like, the list goes on. He wants a team-friendly deal, and the more these extensions go, just the higher that price tag goes. So I think the Eagles, if it was up to them, a deal would be done already. But DeVonta Smith did make a comment one time when interviewed about, why he maybe is not in a rush to sign an extension. And it does feel like he was alluding to saying, the more I wait, the more money I'm going to get. And that is absolutely true. Every time a receiver gets a new contract, you see that price go up and up. Like now, to get a player of that caliber of DeVonta Smith, you got to pay at least $20+ million. And that's only going to rise the better he gets and the more 1,000-yard seasons that he ends up putting up. By the way, in an offense, it's even more impressive because he's not the wide receiver one. He's not the guy in 2021 that's getting the vast majority of targets. No, he's sharing the load with a top 3, top 5 wide receiver in the NFL in A.J. Brown. He's sharing the targets with Dallas Goedert, one of the best tight ends in the league. Now he's sharing those targets with Saquon Barkley in the backfield. So for him to put up the numbers that he has, to me, is even more impressive. So it makes sense why he would want to wait. I just hope that there's not an extension, because I hope the reason there isn't an extension is not because the Eagles are wondering if they're willing to pay two receivers $20+ million long term. Like, I hope their strategy isn't to eventually let one of these guys go and just milk these next 2 years of Smith and Brown and then potentially trade one of them when they're 27, 28 years old for a top draft pick. Like, I understand that logic, but to me, the reason you invest, and this is what I said about the Cowboys when they traded away Amari Cooper after taking CeeDee Lamb in the first round. Like, I get wanting a few years of having two elite receivers, but if you're going to invest top picks, like a first round pick, multiple picks in A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith, to me, that's what the intention of having two of the best receivers in the league long term. Or else, if you're only planning on having those two guys together for a couple seasons, I'm not taking, I'm not trading for A.J. Brown for a first round pick, or I'm not selecting, if I'm the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb in the first round when I already have that wide receiver one. If I'm just planning on using that pick to replace the guy I don't really need to replace, it just kind of feels redundant to me. So you've invested these assets in these two players. To me, I would like to have them together for more than just one contract. So I hope that's not what the Eagles are thinking. I don't think it is. I don't think that's the way Howie Roseman, he's invested back-to-back years, top 2 draft picks at this position. So clearly he wants at least 2 guys long-term. And this is what they did even back in the day with Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin. Like, you don't take in back-to-back years a receiver in the second round and then the first and not plan on having them for more than just a couple years together. So I hope that's not the reason there's not an extension. I don't think that's what it is. I also hope it's just DeVonta trying to increase his value, but I hope it's not him thinking that he wants a bigger role elsewhere. I would understand that he thinks he can, and he can be absolutely a true wide receiver one and be a target monster with another team. But I'm hoping that he does want to be in Philadelphia long term. Again, that's my DeVonta anxiety a little bit. I think an extension will get done eventually, but you never know. It has been pretty quiet on that front. What would a contract look like to me? Well, let's take a look. So A.J. Brown right now is the 4th highest paid receiver in the NFL. He's making total value $100 million Annually, it's $25 million flat. So the only guys getting paid more than A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill is getting $30 million a year. Devontae Adams is getting $28. Cooper Kupp is getting $26.7. So A.J. Brown falls in there at 4 at a $25 million value. For me, DeVonta Smith, you look at who's right below A.J. Brown. Stephon Diggs at 24. DK Metcalf at 24. Deebo Samuel's at 23.8. Pittman just got his, that's the latest contract extension that you can point to that will look a lot like what Devontae's will. It was Michael Pittman. He got 23.3. And DeVonta Smith, to me, is a better, when you're talking Brown, Diggs, Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, DeVonta Smith can make an argument that he's as good as those guys, if not better. But Michael Pittman's where we get to, yes, Devontae, to me, is clearly a better receiver than Michael Pittman. So, and Pittman got $23.3 million. Calvin Ridley this offseason got 23. So Devontae's surpassing 23 million. I would imagine he's probably around within, especially if you go another year where there's no extension or 2 more years and that value continues to rise as more receivers get paid. They're probably going to pay him around the same as what they did A.J. Brown, or if not, maybe a little bit lower. It's probably in that $23 to $25 million range. But I think he's worth every penny. I am very willing to pay both him and A.J. Brown those contracts. Coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, I want to talk a little NFL draft. There's a couple prospects that I'm warming up to more as potential options for the Eagles on day one that I really wasn't into earlier in the pre-draft process. We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. So to me, when you look at it, guys, spending time for things that's important in our lives is so important. But the question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be extremely convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So I work a 9 to 5, but I also do the podcast. I need night therapy. BetterHelp is flexible in that way. If you work the graveyard shift and you need morning therapy, BetterHelp can be your number one source for therapy. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Sometimes it takes a couple tries to get the right fit with a therapist. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get started. You're going to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. Once again, that's BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Wrapping up this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles, and we're talking NFL draft. We just got done recording our Locked On NFL mock draft special. We've been doing this this is 7 years of being on this network. We've been doing this, and it's been so much fun. Can't tell you who me and Gino took. I really like the pick. I think Gino does too. I think it was a little polarizing. Some might not agree with it. I think both you guys and some analysts we had on the show, but it got me really juiced up for the draft. We are almost a month away. I can't believe it's coming up that quick, but that's just how the offseason works. After free agency, it just completely flies. So I've been watching a lot of prospects on both sides of the ball, and I was thinking about 2 guys today that I really wasn't into the idea of the Eagles taking at 22 at positions that I am kind of into for the first round, and now I'm kind of warming up to it. Number 1 on defense, it's Iowa cornerback Cooper DeJean. So this is a guy that I wasn't a big fan of because if you guys know me, and I'm sure at this point you know what kind of prospect I like the traits guys. I like speed. At corner, I like press man coverage. I want you to be a very fluid athlete. You can move your hips, click and close ability. That's so important to me in the modern day NFL with so many explosive receivers. And that's why for Cooper DeJean, I was kind of out. He clocked a 4.5 flat 40-yard dash. He's got stiff hips, right? He's not the best lateral corner. So to me, that's somebody that screams more of a zone corner, potential safety. Some people have suggested that he changes positions. But the more and more I watch his tape, the more I'm kind of overlooking that a little bit, that he can be an outlier that overcomes those weaknesses because he's just so good in every other area. This kid has such an amazing IQ and play recognition, especially in zone coverage, and he closes in so well in off coverage that it might be okay that he runs a 4.5. Like Terrion Arnold ran a 4.5, and to me, that's no issue. I'm still taking him top 15 if I'm a team that needs a cornerback. The Cooper DeJean, he's also such a great tackler. He's got receiver-like hands. I mean, sometimes it looks like the quarterback's throwing him the ball. The way that he tracks the ball over his shoulder, his body control along the sidelines. He's a ball hawk. I mean, he had, 3 pick sixes 2 years ago? He has just such great awareness, and it's why some people think he can play safety, too. He's so versatile. He also returned kicks at Iowa. He was a he was a high school star basketball player. Like, this is a hooper. He did track and field. Like, he is a legitimate athlete, even though he's not the fastest and not the most, short, explosive player. He is still an athlete. And so I'm kind of willing to again, is he a top 4 corner option for me? No, maybe not even top 5. Like, I would take Terrion Arnold over him. I would take Quinyon Mitchell. I would go Nate Wiggins from Clemson. I would probably take Kool-Aid from Alabama as well, and then I would go Cooper DeJean. So he'd probably be my 5th corner. But if the Eagles are there at 22 and they want just a high floor player that, I should say he's still a ceiling guy for sure, a lower ceiling than some of these other players, but I'm kind of in on Cooper DeJean because even worst case scenario, it is a little bit more on the safe side, but worst case, you're getting a very good, versatile safety that can also play corner in case of injuries. Like, if you think he fits better at safety, he can be that hybrid player for you that also plays in the nickel. I don't know. Again, he's not normally my kind of prospect, but he does seem like an outlier that's just going to figure things out at this next level where and again, it's not like he's a 4.7 speed guy. Again, this is a player that returned kicks. He would take interceptions to the house. Like 4.5 is not super slow, and I think he plays faster than that 4.5 40. Again, he's not the athlete of Quinyon Mitchell. He's not the overall talent of Terrion Arnold. He's definitely not the 4.2 speed guy of a Nate Wiggins, but Cooper DeJean just does everything really, really well, and I think the Eagles kind of need that on defense. So is he my number 1 choice? No. He was a player that I was kind of out on for a while, but the more I watch tape, the more I listen to people that know football more than me, and that's a lot of people, I'm kind of in on Cooper DeJean. A guy on offense, wide receiver Xavier Worthy from Clemson, or I should say Texas, and the orange jerseys. I was watching some Nate Wiggins today on some tape. Xavier Worthy's a guy that normally when a player runs a 4.2 and he breaks the record for the 40-yard dash, I start getting flashbacks or nightmares to John Ross and say, we cannot overvalue this player now just because of that speed. You look at the tape, Worthy is not the complete receiver of some of these other prospects, but for the Eagles specifically, they have those 2 complete receivers. If they want to say, screw it, let's go luxury pick at 22, are there going to be other receivers better than Worthy on the board? Most likely. But if you heard me talk about Parris Campbell and why I like that pick. I think a field stretcher is the perfect complement to Smith, Brown, Goedert, and Barkley. Why not get maybe the fastest receiver of all time in Xavier Worthy, who grew up loving Deshaun Jackson? You could get a Tyreek Hill type of speed player as your 4th or 5th option. Again, I don't think the Eagles go receiver again in the first round this year. I think it's going to be on defense, or if it is offense, it's going to be a tackle, in my opinion. I don't think it'd be guard. It'd probably be tackle. But if Howie Roseman wants to say, hey, we did a lot of good stuff in free agency, taking care of needs. We have 2 second-round picks, so we can go corner there. We can go linebacker. We can go tackle. Let's say screw it and just outscore everybody this year and take Xavier Worthy. Wasn't a big fan of that idea before, and I think my head is telling me no, like the analyst in me is telling me no, but the fan in me is saying, what a fun pick that would be, right? I think we would all have the same reaction on draft night. If they took Xavier Worthy, we'd say, oh man, like that's risky and irresponsible, and it's probably not going to work, but damn it, look at those YouTube highlights. Right? I mean, I'm kind of in. So this is more of the fan pick for me. Cooper DeJean was more of the head, and I think Xavier Worthy's more of the heart, for sure. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen each and every day. We will be back tomorrow for one more show. Then we're back next week, Monday through Friday. We are really going to ramp up our draft coverage, so we appreciate you tuning in. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.